Okay, so the first black president, the first black attorney general boasted by this report. So it's probably not racist.
And why is it not common knowledge that this is the story?
It requires some effort. There's no self-interested incentive to put in even a small amount of effort. It's really not that hard to find out that they're false. So there was a trial. If you watch video clips from the trial, see some of the evidence that was presented, you could read a report, but that would require effort and time. What's your incentive? What are you going to get?
What are the motivations here? Are they financial? Are they attention-based?
Their business model isn't based upon making sure that people have correct beliefs or making sure that democracy runs well. It's based upon just whatever attracts attention, and then we can divert the attention to advertisers and we make money. These people don't have any power. The woke people have no power except through people thinking that they have power. All you have to do is ignore them, and then they'll go away. When people are complaining about how greedy these companies are, most of the people who are complaining are also very greedy. Do you ever turn down a raise? You have two companies that you could work for, and one of them is paying more money. Do you ever say, yeah, but this one is less ethical, so I'm not going to take the money?
Well, thanks for coming on, Huemer. We're here to talk about your new book, Progressive Myths. We got 2 copies of it lying around. It's very salient right now, given the recent election results. I first just want to ask you, what is a progressive myth? How do you define it? Where does the basis of the book start?
Yeah, well, so it's an empirical factual claim which appears to strongly support progressive ideology, but which is objectively false or highly misleading. So, there's a bunch of these things. So, the gender pay gap, that women are paid less than men for the same work or something like that. So, sometimes people include for the same work and sometimes they don't mention that. Okay, so for the claim that they get paid less for the same work is just factually false. The claim that they get paid less than men is true, but it's for different work, so that's just highly misleading.
Is there some incentive behind these progressive myths?
You might say, well, there's the incentive that people generally have to convert people to their ideology. And people are just, they're just animated by an ideology and they want to convince other people.
Do you find that the progressive ideology is somewhat consistent, coherent, or are there different kind of factions? And who, I guess I'm also curious on who you think the progressives are, because are they the administrators at these college campuses? Are they the professors? Are they activists online posting on Instagram?
Yeah, so it's been mostly professors who were historically have been driving this sort of whatever extreme leftward turn of the academy. But it appears that recently, the most insane woke voices are students, right? Okay, but now, with a qualification, most students are not extremists, but it's just that there's this particular minority who are particularly loud and annoying, right? Okay, so then, and then there are these administrators who just will not stand up to them, and the administrators are either woke or will just pretend to be woke because they just don't want any trouble, and so then they'll just give in.
So why are these administrators not wanting to stand up? What's going on there?
Yeah, it's puzzling, right? So, it's puzzling to me because these people don't have any power. The woke people have no power except through people thinking that they have power. So if you get these protesters or whatever, they tweet at you on Twitter, and all you have to do is ignore them. They X at you out on X, and all you have to do is ignore them, and then they'll go away because they don't have any they're not writing the paychecks to the administrators or whatever. I don't know, but I think there's a bunch of people who are just cowardly or whatever. It's just they're just afraid of social pressure or something. They haven't understood that Twitter isn't the real world. And if 10,000 people tweet at you on Twitter, that doesn't matter. And it makes you feel like there's this huge groundswell of opposition because, oh my God, 10,000 people. Because if 10,000 people in real life were bothering you, then that would mean that you had done something.
Yeah, you're being attacked by a mob, right?
Yeah.
Do you find there also could be a financial motivation for some of these colleges and universities, maybe for the president? You don't want a Twitter lynch mob, coming after you, or a professor who's maybe researching a connection between race and intelligence.
You might lose your job, you might lose your tenure.
Well, it just brings controversy, and controversy might lose you money. It might get you money, but it might lose you money too.
Well, I mean, like if you're a professor, it's true that you have a self-interested motive to avoid controversial topics. If you're an administrator, then what? What's the problem? You're going to get fewer students. Like that seems pretty unlikely. It kind of seems more unlikely that you would get fewer students if there's stories about how you silence dissent at your school. Will you get fewer donations? I don't know. It kind of seems the other way. Like donors are often rich people who are often conservative, right? The donor class is usually like older, wealthier people, and they're a lot less likely to be woke. But I think there's this kind of selection process, right? Like the way you get to be an administrator and to stay in that position for a long time is not by taking courageous stands on things. So it's like, it might be that when the woke mob shows up, taking a stand against them wouldn't in fact cost you anything, but it's just like the sort of person you have to be to become an administrator is the person who does not stir up controversy, whatever the context.
Sure.
Yeah, you're a person who mostly has just gone with the flow to move up the ladder, pleasing whoever you need to,
Yeah.
and not taking any controversy that would damage your move up to another position.
Yeah, like administrators talk a lot like politicians. If you ever read memos or emails from administrators, it's like this sort of vague, platitudinous verbiage that's similar to how politicians talk, right? Except with a more of a left-wing slant. We need to develop a strategic plan to promote inclusive excellence.
Sure. I guess I'm wondering, just to circle back real quick, if you could put in like a sentence or two, what is like the progressive ideology that's occupying the movement, or
I mean, the position of the left has changed over time a lot, right? And so I don't know what was progressive in the last century is not necessarily what's progressive today. And it's a vague term. So I'm including like the woke ideology and all the stuff about how America is filled with racism and sexism. But I didn't call it woke myths because I also want to include stuff about economics, like the ideology about how the society is unfair to the poor, and there's not enough upward mobility and whatever. Capitalism is unjust and stuff. And then I want to include stuff about global warming, like it's a threat to humanity or whatever, which is not exactly woke, but is progressive. Okay, so like most concepts, the real explanation of what progressivism refers to is just to give examples of it. Like usually, if somebody wants you to define something, usually you can't define it precisely. Usually, the best explanation is just like you give examples.
What do you think about the idea of we're taking progressivism as a little bit of a boogeyman? It's like the scary woke mob who's sitting there and they're trying to take our jobs and take away our free speech.
Yeah.
And then that further just entrenching further right people into just believing more and more irrational beliefs because clearly everything on that side is wrong. So I'm going to believe that the election is fake. I'm going to believe that the COVID-19 was fake. I'm going to believe that everything that anyone tells me on that side is fake. And they're becoming more and more irrational. Like, what do you think of that?
Am I worried about that? I don't know. So that's a possible dynamic. That's a thing that could happen. Hopefully that wouldn't happen. That wouldn't happen when you were reading my book because I don't do that, right? So I talk about global warming, for example, but I don't take either extreme position. So if you're a right-wing person, then right-wing people would be likely to pick up this book. Okay, so the right-wing person is reading it and they're reading about the global warming, and then they'll hear what is bullshit, but they won't see me saying that the whole thing is a hoax, right? Because it's not. Or the stuff about COVID-19, they won't hear me saying that vaccines are a plot to
the vaccine to put chips inside all of us.
I wish we had that kind of technology. But anyway, I do say that the mask mandates were ineffective at best, possibly harmful. But I don't think that about the vaccines. No, the vaccines actually greatly reduce your risk. The masks don't, though.
And you also give a somewhat, I would say, progressive view of the transgender question or that kind of gender philosophy thing, at least compared to what a conservative might be thinking about that topic.
Very, very commonly, the correct rational view is not either of the extremes. So, like one extreme view about transgenderism is the whole thing is just a fake. It's just like they're just dudes pretending to be girls. And then the other extreme view is anybody is whatever they say they are. Whatever, it could be, this very masculine dude with a beard, and all you have to do is say, "I'm a woman," then boom, you're a woman. Neither of those is correct.
So how do you think about progressive myths and how they were influencing this most recent election where we saw the Democrats just take a massive hit that was unexpected, some would say, given the other candidate has a whole lot of issues.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a Democrat, you should be feeling pretty bad. You're not just unhappy, but you should be feeling inadequate and wondering what the hell you did wrong, because how could you lose to one of the most unpopular candidates in history, right? Mm-hmm. In a way, he's popular, but he's also unpopular, right?
Yeah.
One of the most hated people. I don't know, a first candidate to have felony convictions while he was running, and to be found liable for sexual assault during the campaign. It's just also kind of tried to overthrow the government. It's all these things. How are you losing to that guy? And I guess part of the story is that people were sick of the bullshit coming from the left. And it's not most of the people on the left, but it's extremists on the left, and the moderates are unwilling to stand up to them. So there are these people the whatever transgender extremists who are just saying, self-ID, you're whatever you say you are. And dudes can go into women's locker rooms if they just say that they're girls. So, okay. So, and just mainstream Democrats were not taking a stand against them. They were not reining in their own extremists. So that could be part of why they lost. I like to think that that's why they lost.
It seems like, at least in my view, that the Democrats seem to take this stance of if you don't agree with the whole thing, then you're banned from the group, versus the right seems to be like, oh, you kind of agree with us, welcome on in. What do you think's going on there? Why are they not as entrenched in this tribalism where if you disagree with a single portion of the extremist view, you're gone?
Yeah, although, I mean, it's sort of in recent times in the Republican Party, well, if you don't support Trump specifically, that specific individual, then you could be kicked out and whatever. But it's not so ideological. It's not like if you disagree about a particular ideological point, you get kicked out. Yeah, why is that happening? I don't know. So, I mean, it could be that the people on the left have more cultural power. And when you feel, or they feel like they have more power, when you feel like you have more power, then you feel like you can afford to start kicking people out. And then their people on the right feel like they're underdogs. You could question whether they are correct to feel that, but anyway, if you feel like you're an underdog, then you feel like you have to accept people.
We can also move on to a very interesting part of the book was, I think it was part 1, is where you just talk about a couple of individuals who kind of, borderline, the mainstream media kind of lied about what took place with these individuals. And I guess, why would you start with these cases? And maybe we can talk about, I don't know, someone like Kyle Rittenhouse or Trayvon Martin, those cases. I guess, what drove you to start with individual cases where these people are kind of being, I don't know, kind of taken, they're swept up in a media
storm.
Yeah, media narrative or something.
Yeah. So in the beginning, there's the Trayvon Martin story, there's the Michael Brown story, and then a few others. And I kind of thought, well, it's easiest to see the distortions. It's really pretty clear cut. In these cases, you can just get the evidence. Okay, so in the Michael Brown case, well, there's a report made by the Justice Department, and it reviews the forensic evidence, and it's just really pretty well established what happened. And okay, so then you can see how the media just totally distorted, right? And people are just saying total bullshit about these cases. And then, you should take that and let that inform how you receive media reports from more difficult things, right? Because whatever generalizations about society are harder to conclusively verify.
So you're saying it was like these cases are so obvious, the distortion or like the dishonesty, and there's simple cases that it calls into question when they're reporting on anything more complex than like whether or not Kyle Rittenhouse shot someone in self-defense, right?
The other thing was I kind of thought it would be more entertaining, So you get a story about something that happened to a person, so you can imagine this happening, and it's dramatic.
What do you think? Like, what are the motivations here? Are they financial? Are they attention based, where they're playing into? Because I guess you have like a Trayvon Martin or a Michael Brown case where it's clear they're trying to push a narrative of like an unjust shooting of like a black person, right? And so is it financial? Is it for the attention? I guess What do you?
Well, I mean, I don't generally believe these financial motivation stories, or whatever, the conspiracy by somebody to make money. I think it's more ideological. And now, I mean, what happened in the Trayvon Martin case was, it was sort of like I think nothing was going to happen, but the family of Trayvon Martin started this, right? Like, they couldn't accept that their son, so presumably they loved their son, so they were distraught at his death, and they did not want to accept that it was in any way his fault. And so then they started up this narrative, and like, it wasn't that they had something to gain, it was that they were upset that their son was dead. And they wanted to blame the person, and they wanted to bring down retribution for the person who killed him. And so they started this media narrative that, he was killed due to racism, and they hired this lawyer. I don't know if they hired him or if he volunteered, but anyway, they got this lawyer, Benjamin Crump, to help them before this story. And then they would just like pressure the city to arrest this guy, Zimmerman. Okay, so then you could wonder, okay, but why did the media go along with this? Well, the media's business model is based upon attracting attention. So like, their business model isn't based upon being informative and making sure that people have correct beliefs, or like making sure that like democracy runs well and society runs well or whatever. It's based upon just whatever attracts attention, and then we can divert the attention to advertisers, and we make money. That's it.
Which is true for mainstream media and equally true for alternative media, I would say. And I feel like people don't really acknowledge the same incentives exist for alternative media. And you saw that with the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff, where if you look at any like left-wing pundit on like YouTube, and they were just saying crazy stuff about like Kyle Rittenhouse went there to like, he shot people just to defend property or something like that. And some people even thought that like the BLM protesters were black, but I think they were all white, right? So
the people who were shot were all white.
Yeah.
They were all white.
There was one black guy that Rittenhouse shot at but missed.
Okay.
But it would be very strange to say, oh, it was only because of his race.
Sure.
Right? Rather than because the guy was attacking him.
So when we take a look at one of these cases, I mean, it seems like for you it was pretty easy to find the evidence that it wasn't the way the media portrayed it. So then why is it not common knowledge to a lot of people that it's not the case, that this is the story?
Well, it requires some effort. That's it. And then there's no incentive, right? There's no self-interested incentive to put in even a small amount of effort to find out what happened. So a lot of these things, a lot of the myths, like, it's really not that hard to find out that they're false. Okay. There's a Kyle Rittenhouse case. Oh, so there was a trial, and you could like watch video clips from the trial. You could see some of the evidence that was presented. Like the Michael Brown case, there's like this government report from the Justice Department. You could read the report, but that would require effort and time. And what's your incentive? What are you going to get from it?
Yeah.
Well, they might argue that clearly the institution is biased. If you watch the court case, like they're only going to bring evidence that supports that he's not racist, and all the other evidence they're hiding.
Yeah.
I mean, there's two sides in a trial, right? So yes, each side is biased, but so the prosecution did their best to get this guy convicted, and they couldn't. And like there's this jury who had to sit there for many hours listening to all the evidence that both sides could come up with. And if you didn't listen to the evidence, you should probably defer to the people who did. Like the Michael Brown case, like this. Okay, so this report is produced under Eric Holder, who was the first black attorney general, I think. And so, Eric Holder and Obama both stood by it. Okay, so the first black president, the first black attorney general both stood by this report. So it's probably not racist.
Yeah, I guess the hard part with sometimes progressive ideology says something like, even if all the agents or actors in the system are like acting innocently, it's somehow the system itself is systemically racist or institutionally racist or something like that. And I'm not sure usually how to take that, but I guess I don't know. But that's usually what they say, and that's such a broad myth. It's hard to combat. But
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, hard to falsify that, right? How do you test the vague claim that the system is racist? There have to be some specific details about how, what do you mean by the system? What about the system? How is it racist or whatever? Sometimes you get, so like I think the most common example I've heard of systemic racism is, the drug laws are racist. And and the most common example of that is, crack cocaine is punished more harshly than powder cocaine. And then sometimes you hear people quote, actually, it's like punished 100 times harder, which is obviously false. So I think it's punished about 1.3 times harsher. Okay, but anyway, they say, it's due to racism because black people, like crack is more popular with black drug addicts and powder cocaine is more popular with the white drug addicts. Okay, is that the reason? That's part of the reason, but it's actually not racism in the traditional sense, right? Because the reason why they introduced harsher sentencing for crack cocaine was that crack cocaine was devastating black communities. And so people who were trying to help black communities proposed a crackdown, right? And so, and you could see because like most black legislators voted for ramping up the drug war, and most Democrats voted for it. And actually, I think maybe it might have had stronger support among Democrats than Republicans. So like the people who were concerned about helping the minorities were more like they were in favor of the drug war because, like, oddly enough, the drug war was supposed to help things. It wasn't supposed to just cause harm. It was supposed to stop drug use.
Yeah. So it's like this post, like after it happens, you look at it retroactively and you create the narrative because clearly it caused damage to the black communities. That must have been the intent.
Yeah, but actually, it's not uncommon for government policies to produce the opposite of their intended effect, or to just fail to do what they're supposed to do and to have some other negative consequences. That's actually really common. So actually, if the government is hurting the black community, it's actually quite likely that they're trying to help.
Yeah.
Very, very often their help is more harmful.
Yeah, and if they were trying to hurt them, they might inadvertently help them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Maybe we should elect more racists. Incompetent racists.
Yeah. So I guess this comes to a larger point that you talk about in the book, which is all around the systemic racism, and you talk about the racist police shootings, the drugs, the implicit bias, and the stereotype threat. And the racist police shootings, you bring up a bunch of data about how cops maybe aren't actually as racist as we think. Yeah. What is that about?
Yeah. Well, okay, so what people say is black people are only about an eighth of the population of America, and they're about a quarter of the police shooting victims, or just police killing victims. So they're disproportionately likely to be killed by police. Oh, it must be racism. Okay. Here's another really even more shocking disproportion, which is that men are about half of the population, but they're about 95.5% of the police homicide victims. So, oh my God, the police are like incredibly sexist. So, you heard that, if you're black, you're like twice as likely to be shot as a member of the general population. But if you're a male, you're like 21 times more likely to be shot or something like that as a member of the general population. So it's just an insane level of sexism. Or it could be that more males engage in aggressive behavior towards the police, and like they're more likely to attack the police or something like that. How could we verify this? Well, okay, it turns out that something like 90% of murders are committed by men. So like that's some evidence that men are more aggressive. Like almost all cop killers are men. Okay, so if you buy that, so that shows that it's probably not, or it's not necessarily sexism. I can't prove that there isn't sexism, but there's no reason to say that. So then by the same token, what if we look at the homicide statistics by race? Okay, well, black people commit something like 40% of the homicides and 43% of the homicides of police officers. So like 43% of the cop killers are black. So it could be that there's more aggressive behavior. That's why there's a higher rate of police shootings.
I can imagine a progressive sitting here being like, hearing you give the comparison of the male crime rate or whatever, and saying something like, it's the patriarchy, Huemer. It's the patriarchy. It's the way the males have set up society has actually hurt men and makes them more violent or something like this. And the way that the social norms and all this affects everything, that they're going to end up being disproportionately affected. They suffer under the patriarchy. And in the same way, because of systemic racism and all the racism in the past, black people are going to suffer. I guess you're going to hear something like that in response.
Yeah. I mean, notice how, if women are disadvantaged relative to men, that's obviously the patriarchy. But then when men are disadvantaged, that's still a patriarchy. Then, but anyway, well, is it that society has taught men to be aggressive? I don't know. I mean, like the original question was just like whether the police are biased. Okay, so whatever the reason is for the greater male aggression, it's not that the police are biased. It's not their fault. But anyway, okay. But is it that society is teaching men to be aggressive? Is there any evidence of that? Like, if you had kids, like sometimes the kids fight with each other. Does any parent say like, "Good job, Billy"? Punch your brother more. Like,
more aggression.
So you have to say, oh well, it's just like some subtle thing. Like like they see war movies or something. They see people fighting, and that makes them
violent video games,
and that has more effect than the parents telling them not to fight or something. Okay, but anyway, what's the evidence for it being that rather than biology? Like, I'll tell you the evidence that it's biological. Number one, it's cross-cultural. Number two, it's cross-species, right? So like among other animal species, like sometimes the animals will fight with conspecifics, and it's almost always males fighting other males. And then, and in America and worldwide, it's something like 80% of murder victims are men and 90% of the killers are men. So it's murder is mostly men killing other men. If there's a pattern among humans that looks like what's happening among other animal species, it's just crazy to say that it's a completely different explanation for us, right? Except that like, we just don't want to admit that we're animals. And like we have some of the same instincts that our evolutionary ancestors had.
The next one you talked about was implicit bias, which I didn't know anything about the IAT test.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about the IAT test that was developed?
Yeah, it's this thing that I guess psychologists love called the implicit association test. It's supposed to detect implicit attitudes by detecting how difficult it is for you to form certain associations. So it's like you're going to be shown something on a screen, and then you're going to have to press, one of two buttons, okay? And like you're supposed to press a button, for example, you're going to be shown something, and you're supposed to press a particular button if the thing relates to either white people or goodness, and then a different button if it relates to either black people or badness. Okay, and then they time your reactions to see how quickly you can do this, which tests how easy it is for you to form the association between white people and goodness. Okay, and then there's another condition where you're supposed to associate white people with badness, so press the button for white people related or bad related. And then it turns out that most people find it easier to form the white good association than the white bad association. Okay, so then that's supposed to show that most people are racist. All right, so that is an explanation. That's like an intuitively plausible explanation for the reaction time differences. The reaction time differences are on the order of 200 milliseconds, 0.2 seconds. So that's like, I think, that's too small of a difference for it to be conscious. So it's an unconscious difference, so that suggests you just have this unconscious bias. It also happens even among a lot of people who have explicitly egalitarian beliefs. So the people will tell you explicitly they think whites and blacks are equal, but they still show a reaction time difference. Okay, so that's why they think it's implicit or unconscious. And you can do this test for different things. You can just detect different associations, and so it turns out that people associate women with home and the family, and men more with work, stuff like that. So just like stereotypes. we'll get confirmed by that. Confirming that we have the stereotypes.
So then, do we all have implicit bias? Are we all secretly racist and sexist?
Yeah, well, it's hard to say. Maybe, but they've had a hard time finding tangible consequences of this, right? So, okay, well, does it actually predict discriminatory behavior? Well, it's really hard to detect discriminatory behavior correlated with your IAT scores. One of the interesting things is, okay, so you hear that people have generally positive associations with white and generally negative associations with black, or more negative. Okay, the same test shows that people have more positive associations with women and negative associations with men. So in other words, they have longer reaction times when you're supposed to click for male or good than when you're supposed to do female or good. But you don't hear that reported. Okay, it is plausible, I don't know, the explanation is intuitively plausible that it's because we have unconscious attitudes, positive or negative associations. But whether that causes any tangible effects, we don't know. You can change your IAT score. So as a matter of fact, if you give somebody the test and then you give the same person the test again, there's not that strong of a correlation between their scores. So there's something like a 0.5 correlation, which is extremely low considering that it's the same test. Right? Usually you give somebody a test and you give them the same test, the same person, the same test. Usually there's a really strong correlation, like 0.9 or something like that, if it's a good test. So it suggests that it doesn't measure a stable psychological trait. But also, you can train people to change their scores. So, you could do things like show people, prime people with examples of, admired black people, right? And then, that will improve their IAT scores, make it easier for them to form the association between black people and goodness. But so what? There's no evidence that causes any tangible benefit. You just change your reaction times by 200 milliseconds, but there's no there's no evidence that there's a change in actual discriminatory behavior.
Yeah. We have the gender pay gap, which you kind of covered, and what is that about? Why is it not how people think it is?
Yeah. So you hear. It used to be said, this was decades ago, it was said that women earn 59 cents for every dollar that men earn. This was I think in the 1960s or something. And then the number has gone up from there, 70 cents or 74 cents. The latest is it's gone up to 82 cents. Okay. And then you're supposed to think, I take it, that this is because male employers are just assholes who don't like women. They just underpay the women. And now, if you know any economics, you should be at least a little bit suspicious, because if there were some employers who were doing that, and then there are other employers who pay people fairly, the second group would outcompete the first in the marketplace because or they don't have to pay people fairly. They could just there's this employer who's paying 82 cents for work that's actually worth $1. Another employer could come in and pay 92 cents. And then they could hire away the female employees. They would have lower costs. So leaving the sexist employers, they wind up just employing a bunch of men for $1. And then the less sexist employers wind up employing a bunch of women for 92 cents and getting the same work for less money. So if you think in economic terms, it doesn't make sense that this would be happening systematically. But anyway, the evidence is just well, if you control for a bunch of pay relevant characteristics, then the pay gap goes away. Right? So the reason for the gap, the 18-cent gap, is that, well, men and women are doing different work with different conditions. So if you control for experience, hours worked, occupation, and obviously relevant characteristics, then the gap virtually disappears.
And it goes to 99 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, or something like that. Yeah. So and different sources give whatever 97 cents, 99 cents, or something like that.
Yeah, and at that point the difference is small enough where it's is this really racism?
Yeah,
or sexism. Yeah.
I mean, if you're at a 1 cent difference, that could just be random. The other thing is it could be other pay relevant characteristics that you didn't control for, because who's to say how many things there are? There are many things that could be relevant to your pay.
Wait, and then you brought up just a few more factors, because I think you also brought up in the book things like being able to work overtime, moving for your job, I guess things like that, things that are men are just more likely to do more often than not.
Yeah.
And because women don't necessarily want to do, they might want to start a family, or they may want to, they might not be interested necessarily in grinding, 60-hour work week necessarily. They might want better work-life balance, right?
Yeah. So like the main reason for the pay gap is probably that men prioritize monetary income more than women do, right? And I phrase it that way intentionally, like because there are different values in life. Money is not the only thing that matters, and maximizing your money income is not necessarily the way to maximize your well-being. All right, so like men have a higher priority for money as compared with other values. So like where you want to live, right? So like a man is more likely to move for the company. Company wants you to move somewhere. He's okay, and it's a less desirable place to live, but they'd be like, okay, because they're going to pay me more. All right, and now and that does not mean that men are overall better off. Like they're better off with respect to money, but that means they're worse off with respect to these other things.
Yep. And even if taken like an evolutionary psychology lens on why are men doing this, it's like historically in dating for men, having more resources has always been more beneficial. Yeah. So they're willing to make more sacrifice so that they have a more successful life of relationships.
Yeah. So part of it might be they're trying to impress women, basically.
Yeah.
They might be explicitly thinking that, actually, or they might just not really be thinking that explicitly, but that might be part of the explanation of why they feel like they like money so much, right? Yeah. They don't know why they like it, but they just feel like they want more money.
Yeah, like so I get more money and it seems that some stuff goes better.
Yeah. So, because like, these evolutionary explanations, I feel like we have to tell this for people who don't think about evolutionary psychology. Like, the evolutionary explanations are, like they don't presuppose that people are thinking about what will maximize their reproductive success. Usually it's that you have certain feelings and you don't know why you have those feelings, but you act on them anyway. That happens to all of us. And the reason you have those feelings is that in the past, people who had feelings like that tended to reproduce more. Okay, so people who are like really like climbing the social status hierarchy tended to reproduce more in our evolutionary past. And so now you just feel like doing the things that are going to increase your social status, and you don't know why. But
yeah, and there seems to be this sense of admitting the game behind the game actually detracts from you winning the game. Like if you're trying to gain status and you tell everyone you're trying to gain status, you're not going to gain any status. You're actually going to go down. Same thing with like with reproductive success, right? It's like, oh, I'm doing this so I can get more dates. Like. That's essentially going to lower you in the hierarchy.
Yeah, if you tell, right, you put on your dating profile, I'm trying to maximize my reproductive success.
My new Hinge bio, dude. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, it's like there's an incentive for the human brain to put these away and ignore the fact that we have these motivations because they would, in fact, be detrimental to our success. And therefore, we're going to hide them away, abstract them away behind more pure motivations.
And by the way, just like in case people are wondering, why would this be for men and like more than for women? Don't women want to climb the status hierarchy also? Well, okay, so this is just like an empirical fact. We have more female ancestors than male ancestors, like a lot more, which means in our evolutionary past, most women reproduced and most men did not reproduce at all. They were genetic dead ends. Which means there's more competition. Like the way this is possible is that most societies have practiced polygyny. So like a man could have multiple wives. And that means that there had to be a bunch of men who got no wives at all. And so that means that you have to climb the status hierarchy because it's the high status people who get to have the multiple wives and the low status people who get to have zero. But the same logic doesn't apply to women. The women would get to reproduce regardless. Right? Because like whatever, the high status men would be happy to reproduce with a low status woman. It's just like
Yeah. Sure. One of my favorite things in regards to this is there's a lot of maybe younger men online who have this idea that, oh, the past was way better. I should just go back to when men were men. And then it's like, if you were actually existed back then, in the state that you exist now, you'd be at the bottom of the status hierarchy. You would have a way worse time than if you existed right now as you do right now.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, you'd have a much better chance of being dead because, it was very common for primitive tribes to fight with each other. And like the men of one tribe would get together and go and attack another tribe just because it's another tribe, and they would go and attempt to kill the men in that tribe, so then they could kidnap the women and take them back to their tribe,
Yeah.
which is horrible. But don't get mad at me for saying that. I'm not doing it. I'm not advocating it. I'm just like reporting the facts. Anyway, that's what happened, and so that's why the past was horrible, right? And this was not fun for the women because the women would be like coerced brides, but it's less fun for the men because like the men would be dead, right? And like I thought for a while, like just going back many years, like I didn't understand why war was so common in human history because it seems irrational. Because like you go to war, you have a high chance of dying. Okay, maybe you can capture some territory, but like so many of your people die and so many of the other people die. Like why are they fighting? And this is the explanation, right, in evolutionary terms, right? So first of all, most men would have 0 offspring in the ordinary course of events, which means in evolutionary terms, you have nothing to lose. So, and then if you go and attack a neighboring tribe, if you get killed, say there's a 50% chance you get killed, your reproductive success is 0, but it was already 0. And if there's a 50% chance that you go and you capture 2 wives, then your reproductive success goes up. So,
Yeah.
So it's worth it.
Yeah, or even if you come back as a war hero,
Yeah.
your reproductive success probably goes up as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, it's the ugly truth about human society and nature.
Moving on to more possibly ugly things, you also talked about another shocking myth about the sexual assault rates on college campuses, and how they're kind of misleading and like vastly kind of maybe overreported. Can you talk to us more about that one? Because I found it kind of shocking, just because when you go to a college campus, like the first thing you do is you go through like a sexual assault training course or whatever, or like an alcohol, being safe with alcohol kind of thing. Yeah. And you're often told like you're told these sort of statistics, So I'm just
Well, it's common to hear that a quarter of women get raped in college. If you go to college, you have a quarter probability of being raped. And if you believe that, you should not send your kids to college. And if you're sending your daughter to college, you either don't believe that or you're a terrible parent. Because this implies that American college campuses are 10 times more dangerous than Detroit, which is the most crime-ridden city in America. But also that's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah.
You should at least be on its face suspicious of that statistic. Yeah, so what happened? And, there are a bunch of things that they did that just sort of like to get the statistics up. And they're like, okay, there's a slight calculation error where they calculate 24% and it should have been 22%. And then there's a thing where like, okay, so they surveyed people on like how many of them had been sexually assaulted in some time period. And it was like 6.9 months. And then they multiplied it to try to get how many would be assaulted within a complete college career. Okay. And they assumed the college career was 5 years, which makes the number go up. Actually, on average, a college career is 4.33 years. So if you use 4.33, then the number goes down. Okay. And then there's, they counted the summer months, but you're generally not in class then. It doesn't seem like you should count that. So if you subtract the summer months, it goes down again. Frequently, so they kind of lump together attempted rape with actual rape. And if you distinguish those, like the actual rape is a lot lower, or something like half. Okay. And then there's this thing where like they do these surveys and they ask you, they ask questions about things that could have happened to you, and then like the questioner decides whether you were raped. But also they ask, would you say that you were raped? And like half of the people that the survey authors said were raped said that they were not raped. Right? Like half the time the survey respondent thinks you were raped, but you think you weren't. Okay, and so we take that out, then the number goes down again. And so it turns out that when you make a bunch of corrections, it's probably like 5% or something like that rather than 25%.
Which I don't know, would that be out of the ordinary, or would that be kind of expected?
Is it, like that, out of the ordinary compared to what? Like, is it higher than
anywhere else
ordinary?
other than a college campus?
Yeah, I guess a normal city. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, so yeah, I don't know what the overall rape rates are. So, That's probably, yeah, it sounds like that's high, like compared to not being a college student. Now, you might think, well, so that's weird. Maybe that's not even true. Oh, another thing is like different surveys get different results. So like the people who did the study that gave the, that the 25% statistic is based on, they also did a survey with a different methodology that got estimates an order of magnitude lower. And so, okay, so it's not really clear what's going on. But so could it be that college campuses are more dangerous? It could be because like maybe there's like more drinking and there's more like maybe there's more horny guys because they're sort of young and they've just gotten freedom and whatever.
Yeah, I guess I was curious while you were researching this topic or kind of looking over if there was any information on like where the assaults took place, if it was more likely than not like a fraternity household or like a social gathering of some kind with alcohol. And because I would imagine that, I mean, we were kind of in Greek life for a little bit, but I would imagine the Greek, it'd be pretty bad at Greek life maybe.
Yeah. So I don't know. See, I'm not sure whether that is reported or not, but if it was, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sure.
But even regardless of whether the statistics are correct, I think a lot of people ascribe, if it's 1 in 4 women that are raped, then it must be 1 in 4 men that are rapists, right? And at least what we've seen from David Bust and his research with why men behave badly, it's like the offenders are the ones that are very likely to be repeat offenders.
Yes.
And there's very few minority that actually commit most of the rapes versus it being just one man for every woman. And
no, that's right. Yeah. So in fact, this is widely recognized even by, progressive people or like, the progressive people who are giving education about sexual assault. I think they widely know this. It's mostly that there's a small number of repeat offenders rather than a large number of offenders. Sometimes you hear people say, or like I've heard people say, like there's all these women who've been sexually harassed or sexually assaulted, but there's all these men who say that they don't know any harassers or assaulters. Actually, that's not that strange because there aren't that many. It's just, that they're repeat offending. Plus, of course, the ones who are doing it are not telling other people about it.
Yeah.
So,
is it also true that you're more likely to be assaulted by someone you know, or is that not actually?
I think
that's something that I had been told.
I'm not sure, but that does sound plausible.
Okay, because now I'm trying to imagine putting that together with what you guys are talking about. How it's also usually a repeat offender.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think with this whole narrative, there's also goes an idea that that you have like this incel movement. You have all of these people who are very antisocial or just don't really talk to people and interact with people, and they're the rapists. But we also see that the people most likely to be rapists are people who are generally very charismatic, are around a lot of people, are probably attractive, and actually generally have a lot of success in dating, and then they also go ahead and take more than is consented to. And so, like just as a side point, like the people who are socially awkward are not the people you should be most worried about. And the incels are usually awkward people who don't know how to interact with women or people in general. And the people you should be worried about are psychopaths and people with antisocial personality traits in general. And those people are usually actually charming. Or they appear charming at first before you know what they're actually like. Like Ted Bundy was a very charming man. It's disturbing how like he's very good looking and he just comes across very well if you watch an interview with him. Yep. And so part of the effect of this is you have a lot of shy men who are getting more and more scared of getting sexual assault accusations, so they're unwilling to go outside and go talk to a woman. And you all have on the other side women being like, why does nobody talk to me anymore? Why am I not getting approached? And the people who need the message of don't assault women are the ones who are least likely to take that message and run with it. And the people who are least likely to assault women are the ones who are like, okay, I'm going to back away all the way and not do anything that would ever offend a woman.
No, that's probably right. I suspect it's partly rationalization, like the people who are having a hard time talking to women in the first place, then like they hear bad things that could happen and they just sort of like blow it out of proportion, right? Because it's really not likely that you're going to be accused of sexual harassment if you're just like a normal person. Like if you're talking in a normal way or even in an awkward way. Okay?
Yeah.
Like that's not what they call harassment. Right. But it's probably like these guys are over perceiving the risk because that's just like a psychological trait that people have.
Yeah, they pay a lot of attention to what everyone thinks about them, and that might be why they're also awkward.
They over perceive, right? By the way, just for the awkward people out there, like if you're worried about what other people are thinking about you, they're probably not. They're not thinking about you. If you said something embarrassing and like you're thinking about it, probably nobody else is thinking about it. They might have slightly noticed it and then they forgot about it in 5 minutes. Okay. So anyway, that's just as a side beneficial point for Bruce.
Yeah. The next point that you talked about was that women don't lie, which you had a lot of quotes in there at the beginning. I found one of them quite humorous, which was Joe Biden at the Kavanaugh hearing. And he's saying, oh, yeah, I've been saying believe all women if they come up and have a claim. And then it's him at his own accusation. He's like, I've always said that you should take it seriously, but you should verify it. You should look into it. And he's like switches his stance around, which I thought was funny.
Yeah, it was so the left-wing people faced a dilemma when Joe Biden was running for office because was this Tara Reid, I think, came forward with a sexual assault accusation against him. And like the Democrats have been saying, you should believe women, you should believe all women, whatever. But now their favorite candidate. So now what are they going to do? And some of them were just like, yeah, no, believe all women. Joe Biden is an asshole. But then some of them were like, well, we didn't mean literally believe all women. We just meant take it seriously. Don't automatically disbelieve them. Okay. So, but anyway, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened with Joe Biden. I don't know what happened with Brett Kavanaugh, whatever. But you can't decide whom to believe. Like, there's a disagreement, or like, one person says X happened, another person denies it. You can't figure out what happened just by looking at the genders of the two people. Like, there is not a gender that always tells the truth or that always lies. Okay, and the possibility of somebody lying about rape or sexual assault or something like that is like, it's not that outlandish. It's not obviously more outlandish than the possibility of somebody committing those crimes, right? Like, both of those are deviant behavior. It's highly deviant behavior to attack a woman, but it's also highly deviant behavior to report that you were attacked when you weren't. It's not obvious that one of those is like more deviant and, and therefore would be less likely to happen.
Yeah. And if there were a progressive right here, I would imagine they would say that, well, why would a woman put themselves through all the pain and toil of having to deal with telling their story and getting all this media attention and just like the perceptions of the people around them? Why would they even go through that and lie about it?
Yeah. I mean, it happens that we know some things about this because we know of some cases of false rape accusations. Okay, so there's a study by Eugene Kanan, which the progressives don't like, but he found like a rate of something like 40% false rape accusations. Right. So most of the studies find lower numbers than that. Okay, but anyway, and that paper includes descriptions of some of the cases. Right. So like, here's a fairly typical example. There was a woman who was cheating on her husband while her husband was away overseas. She became concerned that she had become pregnant from her lover, and therefore she made up a story that she had been raped in order to cover up the infidelity, because what are you going to say, right? And so, if you're surprised that would happen, then you haven't met that many human beings. That's how human beings are. And so, there's another story. So, there's like covering up infidelity. That's one explanation, or just like getting out of trouble with other people. Another explanation is revenge, right? So there was a young woman who was living in her mother's house, and there was a boarder who was renting a room in the house, and then she was having an affair with the boarder. When the mother found out about this, the mother kicked the boarder out. Okay, and while he was packing, the young woman goes to him and says, "Okay, just wait for me for an hour, and I'll join you." And then he says something like, "Who the hell wants you?" And so he's an asshole.
Yeah.
And so then she gets revenge on him by accusing him of rape. Okay. And then, and then there's a third story of, so a third type of case is trying to get sympathy. All right, so there's a case of a woman who made up a story about being raped by a stranger in a park or something in order to just like to tell her friends. She wasn't trying to report this to the police, okay? She was just like trying to get sympathy or something from her friends. But then they decided they had to report it to the police.
Yeah.
And so now what is she going to say? No, I was just lying. No, just wanted to say that. So she has to like give the police report, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and there might even be this idea behind what you're talking about gaining sympathy is if all the people you know are coming out about a rape case, you might just add your own as a way to fit into the in group. It reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever read The Status Game by Will Storr, but he talks about this woman who was about to give birth to a child, and she's kind of lost about how to be a mother, and she finds this online Facebook group which is anti-vaccines. And part of the status game in that group was you would just make more and more radical claims that weren't necessarily true to gain either sympathy or to gain status points within the group. And so sometimes there'd be lies about their kids having problems because of vaccines, or, oh, my cousin, this happened to him because of the vaccine. And it was just this continuous cycle of adding to the fire in order to gain standing within the group.
Yeah. This is a flaw in the human psyche, the desire to fit in with a group, and just like whatever people in the group are talking about, you'd like try to join in.
Could you also speak to, I think you mentioned in the book how not only we might have a lot more false reports, but also there are a lot of cases where women who are assaulted do not go forward. Is that also somewhat, is that true or?
No, yeah, that's definitely true. So there's, like the Justice Department does a survey, the National Crime Victimization Survey. Okay, and so like they have estimates of the frequency of rape, and then most of the people in the survey who report having been raped also say that they did not report it to the police. And so like it's both overreported and underreported, right? Overreported in the sense that people sometimes report being raped when they weren't, and it's underreported in the sense that usually if you were raped, you don't report it. And so like that unfortunately makes the frequency of true reports lower, right? And then, okay, well, why would that be? Why would you not report it? Usually people report crimes, I guess. And well, you can kind of understand because like if you report it, then you have to relive this incident in front of strangers repeatedly. So you have to tell the police, but the police are going to interview you more than once to make sure that your story is the same both times. And then you're going to be interviewed by the defendant's lawyer, who is going to try to impugn your credibility. And then you're going to have to do depositions, but then you're going to have to repeat it in open court. And this is like the most unpleasant thing in your life. So it's like, it's really not in your interest.
So we talked about the racism issue, the sexism issue. And then you talked a little bit about the gender issue.
Yeah.
Which, honestly, when I read this portion of your book, I didn't find it super controversial or non-progressive. But could you go over the thoughts in those two chapters?
Yeah, what's going on with gender? What is gender? People. I keep hearing that people have genders.
What is a woman?
Yeah, what is a woman? Nobody knows. Well, yeah, it was, like apparently, per Matt Walsh, progressives can't answer that question. And like it's like super hard for trans activists to answer what is a woman. I don't think it's that hard. I just hadn't thought about that much. Okay, but the progressive view is there's a distinction between sex and gender. Maybe there are different uses of the word woman. So maybe in one of them you have to be an adult human being with the female biological sex. That could be one use. But it could also be you just have to be an adult human being with the feminine gender. So that would be like what they would say was a woman. Okay.
Sure.
And you're like, okay, but what is the feminine gender? And actually, most of the progressives don't have a very good answer to this because previously, before the fad of transgenderism, progressives were saying gender is a social construct. Unfortunately, that does not fit with the trans activist ideology. Because if it's a social construct, that means your gender is determined by society So that means if you say you're a woman, but society says you're a man, then you're a man. Like, they don't want to say that. Okay, but actually, luckily for them, they were wrong when they said that gender was a social construct, right? And like, there's really strong evidence for this from, well, like the phenomenon of transgenderism. Okay, so like there are these people, in some cases, there will be people like, there'll be kids like 4 years old who start saying that they're the other gender, like they're biologically male, but they start saying they think that they're girls, they try to wear dresses, and like they just show more girl typical behavior from the very beginning of the time when there's sex differentiated behavior in children, like at least in some cases, okay? So, and then you're like, and like it wasn't like society didn't tell them to do that. So it doesn't appear to be a social construct. It appears that there's something inside of them. So it appears to be biological. Okay, so like, so here's the theory. Well, you know, males and females differ for biological reasons in many ways, and like all over the body. You take out an organ of a body, a male body or female body, there will be at least some slight differences in most organs. Perhaps including the brain. It would be weird if the brain was the only thing where there were no male-female differences. And actually considering how important the brain is for human behavior and like how important it is for your reproductive success and also how different the strategies are for male and female reproductive success, it would be totally bizarre if there weren't differences in the brain. And of course, there are differences in the brain that are well known among brain scientists. Okay, so the thought is, well, it could actually happen. Maybe sometimes it happens that you get a male typical brain in a female body, like the rest of the body is female typical, or vice versa. Maybe that happens. Okay, and so some of the differences in the brain are going to be adaptations to produce psychological characteristics that are adaptive for, you know, promoting reproductive success for a particular biological sex. So those psychological traits are what constitute your gender. Okay, so like periodically, sometime, and I don't know like physiologically why this happens, but sometimes like maybe the rest of the body develops male, but the brain develops in the female way, and then that person is going to wind up having more female typical psychological characteristics, so then they're going to feel like they're female.
Sure. Yeah. I and then you have like a lot of conservatives who are very they find this very hairy and they're afraid because I guess you gave the example of the 4-year-old, and I guess we've seen in a lot of like Republican states they try to ban gender affirming care for minors and stuff like that. I guess I'm not sure what your view would be on that, on whether they like kids should have that access to that health care or like what I guess your thoughts on that discourse in general.
Well, yes, I don't know exactly what you should do, but let's just say you should be very careful about giving cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers or any of these things, or especially surgeries for minors. Right, and the reason is, well, okay, look at the DSM, right, which is the standard reference work for psychiatrists, and so the last edition was in 2013. I'm worried that if they were to do another edition today, it would be like, you know, politically biased. A bunch of people would lobby them to change what it says about gender dysphoria. But anyway, okay, and you know, so it reports that stuff that I was saying, but also mentions that most cases of gender dysphoria will resolve on their own. So like the person will come to accept their birth gender. So knowing that that's the case, should you try to switch the kid? Like probably not. This is like you could easily be ruining their life.
Yeah, I mean, my take on it was always that it doesn't really make sense to take a minor who is still going through a lot of changes psychologically, physically, mentally, all these different kinds of ways, and do something so drastic that is pretty difficult to reverse, which is, if someone is of age, they most likely have the mental capacity to know what they're doing, but a minor doesn't really.
Yeah, so like, so for adults, like, well, I'm a libertarian, people own themselves, or at least, like mentally competent adults own themselves. They could do whatever they want with their body. Mm-hmm. So even if they're wrong, like even if they're harming themselves, they can do what they want with their body, but minors have to be protected by the adults.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, does the libertarian viewpoint suggest that it should be a conversation between parents, kids, and doctors, or should the government step in? And
yeah, I'm not sure. Like at minimum, you should have to have consent from your parents, but I mean, it might be that they shouldn't be allowed to do it even with that, right? Because, sort of like, well, the government has to kind of decide, like, well, do they think they're, like, weigh the costs and benefits, right? Like, because if parents can consent, there could be a lot of cases where the parents are just doing the wrong thing. Like, you're not allowed to do anything you want to your kids, right? And, like, if the government knows that the thing that you want to do with your kids or consent to be done with your kids is harmful, like, they should stop you from doing it.
Yeah, it would be as if the parent consented to the kid smoking cigarettes, and the kid wanted to, and the parents were okay with it. The doctor was okay with it. We should probably still step in and say this could cause irreversible damage to their lungs. We should probably wait till they're of consenting age for themselves.
Or, like, I don't know, to make it clearer, your kid wants to try crack. They want to try crack. And the parent thinks that's great.
Consent.
Well, that will be considered child abuse. You can't do that. Yeah. So, and the reason why I'm not totally sure is like, well, I don't really know. I'm not sure. Like, maybe there are some cases where it's just so clear that the person really is the other gender that you should switch them.
And even when people transition, there is some rate of people who detransition. And I feel like I hear it misreported, or I hear people having conversations about that and going back and forth. What did you find to be like the rate, or how often people detransition?
So I don't know the rate of detransition. Okay, so there's desistance and detransitioning. So desistance is where you say you have gender dysphoria, but you later come to accept your gender, you're apparent to the rest of the world gender. Okay. And then there's detransitioning is where not only did you say that you felt like you were the other gender, but also you actually transitioned to living as the other gender. And then you later transition back. Okay, so that is much rarer. I don't know how common, but the desistance is perhaps something like 80%. And I'm hesitant about that because there's a wide range of different estimates reported in the literature. Okay, but I think 80% is around the most common. I think the reason that there's a wide range is that, well, it's a politically controversial issue. And so, like, there's a bunch of, I think there's a bunch of left-wing people who want the number to be lower. And so, like, that's why there's not a consensus on it.
We talk about the economy.
Yeah.
He talks about generational wealth, the tax burden, and regulation.
Yeah.
What's going on with generational wealth? Is everyone who's rich just someone who inherited it and it's continuing the legacy?
So like the explanation of rich people that is comfortable for progressives is, they inherited it. Somebody a long time ago got lucky and got some money, and then they just keep passing it on. And like, if your parents have money, then you just get to be rich without having to do anything. Okay. And then like the poor people are just unlucky. They just didn't get to have a wealthy.
Chose the wrong parents.
And so like I'm under the impression that many left-wing people believe that, but they have no basis for it. They're just assuming that that's the case, and they've never looked at the empirical evidence. And in the empirical evidence, well, like most millionaires have received no inheritance, right? So it was something like 79% of millionaires in the survey had received zero inheritance. And they reported that the way they became millionaires was by regular saving over many years. Okay, just like take some from your paycheck, put it into the retirement account every month, and do that over and over, and then eventually it grows to over $1 million.
What about regulation? We need to regulate the economy more. All of these companies are taking advantage of us and just maximizing profits and not caring about the consumer at all. We need to regulate them.
I mean, well, that's kind of true, right? But, although, by the way, like when people are complaining about how greedy these companies are, like most of the people who are complaining are also very greedy and like, do you ever turn down a raise? And, and like you have two companies that you could work for, and like, one of them is paying more money. Just like, do you ever say, but this one is less ethical, so I'm not going to take the money. But anyway, okay. So true, like you could have negative consequences for society if like there's something that makes money, but it also imposes a cost on other people that they don't consent to. And so like clearest example of that is pollution. Okay, you're making a product, you're selling it to consumers, and the consumers are like, they're enjoying the product, and then there's like pollution that's going out to other people regardless of whether they paid for your product, so they didn't choose whether to get the pollution or not. Okay, but so like that is an appropriate time for regulation. I mean, like, I think in that case what you should really do is try to price it. That is, you should try to figure out how much harm the pollution is costing and then have a tax that's proportional to that. And rather than saying, oh, you just can't do it at all, right? Or having the government decide how much you're allowed to do. The reason being that, well, that creates the incentive for the company to figure out what is the most efficient amount of pollution to make, right?
Yeah.
The amount where it's worth it for the benefit that's providing.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, if you think that companies are greedy and selfish, like, well, why would you think that government employees are not selfish? Like, okay, so there might be reason to think that businesses are more greedy, or like people who are running businesses are more greedy than the average person, because like the reason why they're running the business is that they want to make a lot of money. Okay, right. So, and then like the people who are in government agencies are maybe less greedy on average because they're not in such a lucrative profession. Okay, but also they're probably like more power hungry than average because like that's what the government does. It exerts power over people. Okay, but also maybe little known fact, I don't know, commonly known but not by leftists, they're a lot of the same people, actually. So like government regulatory agencies will frequently be staffed by people who used to work in the industry that the agency is regulating, or are going to work in the industry after they get done with this stint in the government. Yeah. And if that's surprising, well, it shouldn't be too surprising because actually those people are the experts on the industry. So you have to get people who understand this industry. Okay, so that's why, that's like the superficially public-spirited rationale, but also that can create a conflict of interest. Okay, so then like you should think, given like human selfishness and given the greed of the corporations, you should think that the corporations are going to try to turn the regulatory agencies to their own economic benefit. Do you think they're doing that? Of course they are. Like, of course they're doing that. And who is stopping them? Well, like, okay, and now what is the plan? Like, well, we're going to have the consumers going and like individual consumers are going to go and lobby the agencies. No, why are they going to do that? How many times have you done that? How many times have you gone and like written to a government agency and like tried to lobby them? How many lobbyists have you hired in your life, right? And there's a reason why, well, it's just not in your interest to do that. It's not worth it. Because like, okay, you know, say there's a regulation that is costing $1, you know, for each of 1 million people, and then it gives that dollar to one person. Okay, for the 1 million people who are losing $1, it's not worth it to them to do anything. Anything they can do to try to stop the regulation, it's not worth it. Because like you write a letter to your congressman. Well, would I spend time writing a letter to a congressman for $1? No. Okay, but for the one person who's going to receive the $1 million, it is worth it to them to do something to try to make this law happen. Okay, so that's why there are a bunch of laws that are serving the interests of big players in the industry. And the main way that they do this is by disadvantaging their potential competitors. So if you're a big company, there will be certain regulations that will disadvantage small companies more than they disadvantage big companies. And if you're having a hard time competing with the small companies because maybe your company is less efficient, which might even be because it's so large, maybe the best way of competing is like getting the government to pass some of these regulations that are going to be harder on the smaller competitors.
So then how do we stop these businesses from continuing to be greedy and do things that are most likely unethical, while also knowing that regulation is largely inefficient on these companies?
I mean, we should probably have a lot less regulation, you know, and maybe the laws should be passed by the elected officials and not by bureaucrats. Right? So, I mean, what happens is the elected officials will pass a law that creates an agency and authorizes the agency to sort of like fill in the details. Like it tells the agency what they're supposed to do, but the agency gets to fill in the details of how to do this. And like maybe we shouldn't have that. It wasn't part of the Constitution, right?
Yeah.
That there would be regulators who were not elected.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, so like I'm leaving room for there being times when you have to have a law to stop some bad behavior.
And what do you think of this whole DOGE, D-O-G-E
yeah.
department, which supposedly is trying to regulate the government, and they're businessmen who can't be as easily bought, so a lot of people are seeing a lot of hope for cracking down on government spending. What are your thoughts on that?
The Department of Government Efficiency.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen. Like, so we could hope that it's going to make the government more efficient. There are probably they're probably wasting a lot of money. The government is wasting a lot of money. There's probably a bunch of people who are on a government salary who just don't need to be doing their jobs at all. Like their position doesn't need to exist. Now, but does that mean that Elon Musk will actually get rid of them? I mean, he was good at getting rid of people at Twitter, but I'm not sure it works the same in the government. I'm not sure it's going to be as easy. And also, like, I'm not sure that it's going to last, right? Because, like, maybe as soon as he leaves, or as soon as Trump leaves office, maybe it'll just go back to the way it was, even if they do anything. So I guess that, I mean, like, okay, well, I'm not that worried about, I guess, like, the risk that you'd be worrying about if you're progressive is, they're going to get rid of too many regulations, and they're going to get rid of government employees who are doing something good. I'm not too worried about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I've also heard from progressives, they seem to be really afraid of lobbying in the context of like Congress and just, I guess politicians being bought by corporations and passing legislature or having these agencies just do the bidding of a corporation. Is that a legitimate opinion from these progressives?
Well, yeah, that's a thing to worry about. But now I don't think that what happens is like the stereotype. Or I don't think that what usually, so I think there are a bunch of laws that support big corporations, like serve their financial interests at the expense of consumers and smaller corporations. But I don't think that it's mainly because somebody bought the politicians. I think it's more like somebody donates, like if you own a large business, you could donate to the campaign of the person who you think will serve your interests more. If you actually have a quid pro quo where you meet with a person and say, you have to vote for this and I will give you money, that is illegal. And so that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, but it's kind of stupid to do that because like you could go to jail for that when you could just like donate to somebody and then you could leave it implicit. Sure. Just like he can figure out, like, the politician he can figure out that he's going to stop getting donations if you don't like the way that he voted. Yeah. Okay. But I think that what usually happens is, well, you just pick a politician who you think is already ideologically on your side. Like this politician already thinks that the coal industry is really great. And they might sincerely think that, by the way. It is not out of the question that people sincerely have beliefs like that.
I guess I'm also wondering, because when you hear that this sort of money in politics take from progressives, it's usually accompanied with some idea that the will of the people is being overcome by the money, and in a negative way, and there's harms being done. Like, because you talked about the inefficiencies of the corporations, that maybe regulations are letting them be too big, and they can stomp out competition and stuff. Is there any harm to the people themselves, and is their will being accurately represented?
I mean, there's the example of, I think it's 87% of Americans agree with having more maternal leave and having paternal leave, but somehow we're not getting those outcomes from the politicians that are voting for the issues.
So, I mean, there are times when unpopular laws get passed, although it's relatively unusual. So if a big majority wants something, it usually happens. There are some exceptions, okay? So like I remember during the 2008 to 9 financial crisis, the bank bailout was super unpopular on both the left and the right. But actually it was particularly unpopular on the right, I think. So it's like Republicans were less likely to vote for it in Congress than the Democrats. But okay, but it passed even though it was unpopular with the public. Okay, where was I going with that? But usually, the unpopular thing doesn't pass. Okay, but the thing is, like, my concern isn't really that unpopular things happen or popular things fail to happen, because I think, like, the average voters do not know what they're talking about. They have no idea, okay? So they don't know what the costs and benefits are of things because it's not in their interest to do any research to find out. Mm-hmm. So they just, like, have an emotional reaction to some policy. So, like, do we want things to match what the average voter wants more closely? Not especially, really, right? That's not really my concern. But like there are a lot of things that are against the interests of most voters that most voters still support. Okay, so like farm subsidies, why do those keep happening? It's basically just like taking a bunch of money from everyone and giving it to farm corporations, right? Which, by the way, most of the money goes to big farm corporations, not like small mom and pop farmers or whatever. Not that we should be giving money to anyone. Like, why don't they get money the same way everyone else does? They sell their product. Why don't they just get the amount that they get from their sales?
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason why this industry is different from every other. It's true that food is important, but like, there's a lot of important things. That doesn't mean that you get even more money than what the consumers are willing to pay, right? Anyway, okay. But that's popular. The reason it keeps happening is that a bunch of people think, yeah, we should give money to farmers because I like farmers. And so, but even though it's like costing money for all the taxpayers.
Yeah, and it inherently causes more food waste as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess because David, you brought up the maternity thing, which I haven't heard about.
Yeah.
But you also hear people bring up just healthcare generally about how apparently most Americans want like some kind of government provided healthcare on some level. Or you hear a lot of Americans are usually anti-war and they don't want to be giving money to Israel or Ukraine or something like this. But then the government seems to be doing that. I guess you see moments like that, and I guess we also see a surge in populism, and people don't feel like the government is,
Representing them.
the people, in some fashion.
Yeah, so I mean, like, what are the politicians doing? Like, sometimes when they're diverging from public opinion, it's because they're trying to do what's good for the country. And they think that maybe they know what public opinion is, but they think the public is wrong. So what should you do? So, like, what happened in the financial crisis, I think that what genuinely, legitimately happened was they knew that it was unpopular to bail out the banks, but they also believed that if they didn't do it, there would be like a depression. And then the people would be really mad and they would blame those politicians, even though the politicians did what the people wanted.
Yeah.
And so, okay. So, and like support for Ukraine. I don't know what the level of support is for Ukraine and Israel among the public. So I don't know how unpopular it is. But probably most of the politicians are thinking, yeah, but it's just like really bad if Ukraine loses this war or if Israel loses this war. And I don't know. There's not really a risk that Israel would lose the war, but yeah, they're actually trying to do the right thing, which they're going to be attacked for.
Yeah, and therefore we should vote for better people if we disagree with their decision making.
But yeah, well, yeah. I mean, maybe we should be better people, right? Because, like, okay, well, I'm not like a huge politician lover, but politicians are on average smarter and more educated than voters. Which is part of the reason why we have representative democracy instead of direct democracy. And so, like, sometimes when there's a divergence between what the leaders want and what the public wants, it's because the public doesn't know what the hell is going on. And so, like, maybe rather than voting them out, we should, like, just be smarter ourselves.
Yeah.
One last question here, just because I'm curious, because you're a libertarian. And yeah, we've seen like populism / I would call it like an anti-establishment kind of push in recent years. Like Trump got reelected. Trump's kind of a right-wing populist guy.
Yep.
People love Bernie Sanders. He's kind of a left-wing populist guy.
Yeah.
And like left-wing populism is kind of like this anti-establishment, very skeptical of like what the government's going to do for you, skeptical of politicians generally. I guess how do you feel about that and like that movement as a libertarian? Is it a good thing or has it been harmful? Because I also found that there's a lot of maybe irrationality in the populist beliefs. It seems like.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's a sense in which I'm anti-establishment. Like I've written this book talking about how anarchism is a good idea. Okay, but I don't want like knee-jerk anti-establishmentarianism or whatever. It's like, it's not that we should just like destroy institutions. Like that's not correct. Like, well, what we should do is change our institutions to make them better. Okay, but while doing so, and like I mentioned, anarchism. Like ultimately, at some time in the future, I hope we will no longer need government. Okay, but that doesn't mean that we should just like blow it up right now. Okay. All right. So anyway, while you're trying to, because there are flaws in whatever the current system, the current leaders, and the current institutions, and while we're trying to fix them, we should still attend to what's good about the system. And this society that we're living in is actually vastly better than most societies throughout human history and even today. And so, like if just like totally dumb and foolish to want to just blow stuff up randomly, right? Like part of what you heard when Trump was elected, the first time was like, Yeah, just like he's just going to cause a lot. He's just going to disrupt things. Let's send somebody to just like disrupt things.
Just a wrecking ball. Yeah.
And like that's just like a total failure to appreciate what we have. Like this system actually is the best thing that human beings have created. Like what we have in America, like a system where, well, the institutions generally kind of do what they're supposed to do. Like, okay, like when there's an election, the person with the most votes kind of takes office.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't sound like that big of an ask, but actually that has not happened throughout most of human history. And so, okay, and and just like you have a trial, like generally the outcome is determined by what the evidence actually supports, and like whatever, you don't have to keep bribing people. You don't have to like bribe the cops to take a police report or whatever. all of this stuff, okay, it's a society that's generally working. Okay. And just, both on both the left and the right, there's just like this idea of attacking our institutions, which is just totally stupid. Like, not that our institutions are perfect, right? They're flawed, but just like a general attack on them is foolish.
Right. Yeah. Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, well, there's this availability bias of we have access to more information than ever before, and that also means we have access to information about all the bad things more than ever before. And those are the things that get attention. So then when we ask someone, how bad is the state of our government right now? It's like, oh, well, I saw on the news that everyone is racist, everyone is sexist, the court systems don't work, companies are evil, millionaires are not paying any money. And so it's like, obviously, if this is the information you're receiving, you're going to say, well, we're in a worse time than ever before. I've never had this information before.
Yeah. So, like when stuff is working, that's not news. So somebody reports like, okay, so there was not a civil war today. Nobody deposed the president by force today. Like, okay, so that's not news.
Yeah.
But there would be societies in which that would happen. There was not like, a mass pogrom where millions of people were killed. Okay. So, and then, well, we could report how that does happen in other countries, but actually, like, Americans don't care that much about other countries. So, like, so those news reports are not going to be popular, so that's not what the media will report. So, okay, well, they're just going to report when bad things happen in America. So then you have the feeling that America is doing badly, even though it's actually doing great. When something gets worse, like you can have a news report that says, oh, this thing got worse, this statistic got worse, but when it gets better, they don't report that. Okay, so like the homicide rate has been going down for decades. You see any news reports on that? No. They might report particular cases of homicides. If some like horrible crime occurs, like that will be on the news, but they won't report that like actually crime is way down.
I guess one of my other questions would have been between the left and the right, because we have these progressive myths that you talk about how they kind of strike at the heart of the American ethos and kind of undermine it. And in the same way, the MAGA Republicans and Trump and January 6th and everything that happened there is a pretty big undermining of our democracy. Yeah. And I guess my question to you is, which one do you think is worse or is a greater threat that we should be considering?
Yeah, I mean, so basically, like, well, Donald Trump specifically is a greater threat in the near term. Okay, and I put it that way because, like, well, after Trump leaves or if he dies, the threat is over. That is, I don't think that Republicans in general are going to do the same stuff, but I am worried about Trump himself personally undermining norms. And like in the near term, that's a greater threat. But in the long term, the left is a greater threat because like these are the people who have control of our institutions and our education system in particular. And like they're raising like all these generations of people through the high schools and through the colleges, like teaching them to hate the country and to hate the system that they live in.
Yeah. I guess I would push back a little bit on the Trump thing just because if he is violating the norms, isn't just the mere violation have like downstream consequences for someone who's more competent and smarter than Trump, but is as charismatic to maybe be successful in 50 years maybe and see Trump as a model. And
So, I mean, like the concern is, well, maybe Trump's behavior will be a precedent. So, well, we have to wait to see who succeeds him. So I don't think he's going to bring down the government. Okay, but what has happened is like, well, he basically attempted a coup. He attempted to literally not leave office. Like he actually had a plan to stay in office despite having been voted out. And then he was rewarded for that. He suffered no punishment, and actually we re-elected him after he did that. So the danger is that someone else who is like worse is going to see that and go, huh, okay. So that's how it works. So you don't have to follow the democratic process.
Yeah.
Right. And then, okay, so we have to see where that happens. But if a few decades go by and that doesn't happen, then the norms will probably return
Sure.
to the way they were.
What about science? Global warming crisis.
Yeah.
Is the global warming crisis real? What's going on with that?
Yeah. It's highly plausible that, there actually is warming. I mean, I say it's highly plausible because, well, like a bunch of scientists think that the Earth has warmed by about 1 degree or 1.1 degrees since the start of the Industrial Revolution. Okay. And it's very plausible to me that scientists would be able to know that. Like, that doesn't seem like whatever inaccessible information. Okay. It's more complicated than it sounds, but still, they could probably figure it out. So I believe them. And it's plausible that human beings have played some role in that. Like, okay, well, we dumped a whole bunch of CO2 into the atmosphere. The scientists say that has a tendency to warm the atmosphere. It's plausible that they would know that that's true. Yeah. Like how much of the warming is caused by human activity, I don't know. Okay, but also now is this like a major crisis? Not really. I mean, it's gone up by 1 degree since the start of the Industrial Revolution. That is a potential problem. There will be negative consequences from that. It is not going to kill everyone. It is not going to end our civilization. It will not end life on Earth or any of those things, which, hysterical activists are saying. Okay, and like the hysterical activists are like, oh, listen to the science. But they have not listened to the science because virtually no scientist says that.
So why are they saying that that's the case? Where are they getting it from?
So, I mean, okay, so back in 2018, the IPCC published a report about what we would have to do to limit global warming to under 1.5 degrees C relative to pre-industrial times, and bearing in mind that we were already at 1 degree. So they were talking about how we could stop another half degree of warming, and then they said, oh, we had to take drastic action by 2030. Okay, and then I guess some people took that to mean that if we don't take drastic action within 12 years, we're going to start the end of civilization. Okay, so Greta Thunberg said something like this: within 12 years, we're going to set off a chain reaction that will likely lead to the end of our civilization. Why she thought that, I don't know, but she's not a scientist, and she probably didn't read the report, and so the real question is well, why did a bunch of people listen to her? It's a bunch of other people didn't want to read the report, and so because her book is a lot more entertaining than the IPCC report. Okay, and then AOC says something like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't do something about climate change, and your biggest problem is how are we going to pay for it? Okay, and where did she get it? Well, she got it from Greta Thunberg or from other climate activists, and she didn't want to read the scientist report either. So, part of what happens is, it's just not really in your interest to spend time reading these boring things.
Yeah.
And it's more fun to just whatever. And
be an activist.
Yeah, it's more fun to just start stirring up. Oh my God, the sky's falling or whatever. And apparently, most people haven't figured out that there's a lot of false information. That they haven't figured out that if your side says something sensational, that does not mean that it's true.
Yeah, I think talking about other sides, and maybe even my point will tie into the mask thing as well. But I guess I'm wondering, do you think that sometimes the discussion around climate change and mask science it feels like it's totally destroyed by what I would consider to be really crazy right-wing beliefs, and they kind of enter the discourse and just they stop any meaningful discussion from taking place, and it lets the radicals on the left just run away from reality even further.
Yeah.
Because you'll have people on the right who will fully deny any sort of
there's no climate change.
Yeah.
Masks are fake.
You have Jordan Peterson just saying outrageous things.
Yeah. While not admitting whether he's a theist or not.
Yeah. Well, so probably the extremists from both the left and the right are feeding off each other.
Yeah.
The reason why you can get people to go along with right-wing extremist views is that I guess they think the alternative is the extreme leftists and vice versa. About global warming. So the extreme views are extreme left view. It's the end of the world. We're all literally all going to die. And then the extreme right view is no, nothing whatsoever is happening. There's no warming. It's just all a hoax, right? Or a little bit less extreme. There's some warming, but we had nothing to do with it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then about the COVID-19, there was the extreme view. Well, everybody has to wear a mask all the time.
Or 2 or 3 masks at once.
One on the eyes, one on the mouth.
And then, obviously everyone has to get vaccinated, and then they have to get the booster and the booster or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the extreme right wing view is no, don't do anything. So don't do a mask, don't do a vaccine.
It's all just a ploy.
COVID-19 doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It's it's minor. It's just like the flu, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, a moderate position about global warming is, we are probably having something to do with it, and there are going to be costs. They're going to be non-trivial costs, but it's not like a total disaster. And actually, there are many global problems that are equal or more serious. Okay, and then about the COVID-19, actually, not everything works, but it's not that nothing works. I don't think masks work. I don't think they're effective, but I do think vaccines are effective. And I don't think vaccines have microchips in them, and they don't make you autistic. So can we have something in the middle?
Yeah, something that sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
How is it that it makes sense in all these other societal viewpoints that myths come into play because it's harder to prove certain things, but with science, we have global warming, we have mass, it should be pretty clear cut whether something is true or not. How are these myths even coming about in a scientific view where it's we should be able to look up the facts?
Well, science is actually a lot more difficult and less straightforward than maybe the popular imagination has it, right? So, are people causing global warming? It's not really that straightforward. Actually, there's a whole bunch of things going on at once, and the climate is highly chaotic and whatever. So, in the book, I wanted to tackle myths that are kind of demonstrably false or something like that, or demonstrably misleading. So the myth isn't, it's not going to be something like human beings are contributing to climate change. It's going to be something like the scientific consensus says X. Because that's a definite matter of fact. Okay, so, and the scientists have agreed that global warming is an existential risk. Okay, as a matter of fact, that's false. I know that's false. Okay, but I mentioned that science is not so straightforward because frequently there are published scientific studies which the results of them turn out to be false. They say that there's a connection between 2 variables, and then somebody redoes the study and they can't find the connection.
Yeah.
Right. And actually that is true of most studies in social science and medicine. It appears that most of the results are false.
Coming into the end of the book, what is your main takeaway that we didn't talk about for young people reading this who are maybe attending university or growing up under this progressive myth landscape?
Yeah.
What's that takeaway?
I guess the lesson is be skeptical. If you hear some alleged fact that strongly supports a particular ideological viewpoint, that alleged fact is usually, maybe almost always, either false or misleading. So your initial assumption should be, I bet that's not true, right? Or I bet that's dropping some crucial context, right? And by highly misleading, I mean, it's technically true, but if you knew the rest of the facts surrounding it, you would draw the opposite conclusion from the one the person is trying to make you draw. Okay. So, you should just be aware that that's true in general, and so then you should not be so easily taken in. And the other thing that I want people to realize is, actually this society is great. And, there's a part in one of these chapters where I talk about how the United States is successful. And, for example, something around 400 there's 800 and something Nobel Prizes that have ever been given, and something over 400 of them were won by Americans. Okay, and like it's not just that. It's like there are multiple things, like things that you would want to look at. Like if you look at athletics, like there's a whole bunch of great American athletes, just like totally disproportionate to our proportion of the world population. Like the influential companies, the influential authors, the influential musical artists. So it's just like there's just this huge disproportion of Americans, and you should like appreciate that. Like that shows how this country is just working better. It like lets people succeed, right? It doesn't give you success, but it lets you compete for success. And just like okay, like we're rich, we're relatively happy, free, etc. Just like if you look at the way the rest of the world has been throughout history, you should be very happy to be here, and then appreciating that, you should be like suspicious of people who are like attacking America or attacking our system, right? And so like I don't want to be closed to criticisms of stuff that we're doing, because we're doing some things that are bad and need to be improved, but also, like we should just have people appreciate what we're doing right.
One more question going along like the skepticism thing. Say we have a undergrad and he took your advice, he's now skeptical, but now he wants to maybe know something. He wants to learn what's actually going on in the world. Kind of what would be good, rational, critical thinking kind of practices for him when he's trying to navigate the media.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of these things are not that hard to find out. You just have to try. Like, so you hear something that supports one side of a debate. Just try to find out what the other side says. So like, well, you just do a search and like look for some source that appears to be conservative if it was a liberal idea, or vice versa, right? And then like very frequently, then you'll find out what was wrong with it, with the original claim. Another thing, what are reliable sources of information? Frequently, like academic papers. So there is a left-wing bias in the academy. So like we have to acknowledge that. But also like when we write academic papers, like we professors, we're usually more careful, like a lot more careful than when we just talk to the public. And because there's this process where like it's going to go to these reviewers, and then the reviewers are going to try to tear it apart and whatever. So, okay. Sometimes there's like government statistics. Like you hear this stuff about how, black people are disproportionately likely to be killed by police. Yeah, you can look up the statistics on that. If there's a controversy about a specific case, like a specific event in the news, like the Trayvon Martin case or something, you can usually get court documents. And they're pretty good, because what's going to happen is like both sides in the trial are going to attempt to bring the best arguments that they can.
Okay.
And they're going to be professionals. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So primary sources, court documents, try to get the closest information you can. Argue both sides. Yeah.
Like probably most important is getting more than one perspective, right? I have a part where I talk about like, the differences between reliable and unreliable sources, right? Like you're reading somebody and you're trying to figure out if they're reliable. So you're reading this web page or something. If it's really emotional, it's probably unreliable. And I say that even though like it might be appropriate to be emotional, depending on what the issue is. It might be totally appropriate, but that still, like, the emotional reaction can still interfere with your objectivity, right? Even though it's appropriate. Person makes a lot of absolute statements and doesn't use a lot of qualifications. So like people who are reliable, they will just sort of like feel cautious, and so like reliable people will be hesitant to say that something is always true. They'll just say usually or probably or something like that. And then like reliable people usually acknowledge acknowledge reasons on both sides. So if you're reading something and like it appears from this thing that you're reading that there's no arguments against policy X, all of the reasons are in favor of it. And like you can't find this guy's acknowledgement of any reason why you wouldn't want this policy. That person is probably unreliable.
And you've been working at an institution that's progressive. What's been your experience working in a progressive institution? Why are you able to talk about these things?
So I do have tenure, so officially they can't fire me for being politically incorrect. The philosophy as a field in particular is better than most of the humanities. So philosophers in particular like to hear arguments. And so like if you're giving logical arguments, then that's kind of okay. And if they don't agree with you, like philosophers' response is usually, oh, I better come up with a counter argument, which I think is unlike, whatever, many of the woke people, where their response is, oh, I need to shut you down. I need to make sure that nobody can hear you talk.
And there must be woke philosophers as well, too, right?
Yeah.
Have you interacted with them at all?
No. I'm not sure why, although, I do have a thing that, okay, so I don't tweet, and I am on Facebook, and I have a blog, and people could interact with me. But if I see insulting comments, I delete them. And if I see multiple insulting comments or sufficiently insulting comments, then I block the person. So I will not, after your first, totally unfair interaction with me, you may not get to talk to me again. And I just find that makes life better.
Talking about counter arguments and rational thinking, everything you've just told us in your book about progressive myths, what do you think is the strongest counter argument to everything, to your whole thesis?
I don't know. Well, so I mean the myths that I list, I don't think there's really much doubt. I think it's the stuff that I'm saying is pretty much objective facts.
I guess one way you could maybe rephrase it is because we have the progressive project that you kind of trace back from the 70s or 60s.
Yeah.
And now it's been going on for, 40, 50 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Is there any value to take from the progressive project and that we could that a person could be you know what, they got this right, or this was valuable, that what they did here was good.
Yeah.
Or right.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, in fact, the way this whole thing started was that actually we had a lot of racism. We had a lot of prejudice and a lot of injustice. And so, in the 1960s, people were protesting that. They were protesting real injustices and real prejudice. Right? And actually, they won. And, that's why we have a lot less. I mean, there's kind of an irony in that, I would say, the civil rights protesters from the 1960s did a great job. And the irony is apparently if you're woke today, you have to say, no, they failed. So they didn't do such a good job because we still have racism. It's still just as bad as it was apparently or something. But yeah, okay. So am I against progressive ideas in general? No. I guess believing in gay marriage is a progressive idea. I guess being against racism is progressive. I don't know. Well, that's that's mainstream by now. I guess it was originally progressive. So
yeah, well, you have to be anti-racist now, I think, is probably what they would say.
You can't just be.
Yeah. So unfortunately, what they call anti-racist is really racist. What people are calling the anti-racist position is really racism against white people, or at least that's how it looks to me. That's why I wouldn't like to call myself an anti-racist, but I'm against racism.
Yeah, sure. There seems to be a large vein in everything we've talked about emotional attachments to different political issues, and behind those is some idea of morality, moral facts, but it also seems that what people believe has to do a lot with the emotional framing of the issue. And so how much of what we believe is actually just our emotional reaction to the framing of an issue as opposed to an actual belief in moral facts?
Well, I guess, I mean, it seems like a lot of people's political beliefs, well, first of all, they're not that serious as beliefs, right? They don't believe it that much. To a large extent, people are just kind of, I don't know, saying what they think they're supposed to say, or they're saying what their side says, and they don't really know what's true. And, I'm saying well, it's not that much of a belief. It's the stuff that people will say about politics, it's not that much of a belief. It's not that they totally don't believe it. They're not totally lying, but it's not, they don't believe it that much because they don't care that much about whether it's true. They're not trying that hard to find out whether it's true before they say it. And they know that they didn't try very hard. But so, I mean, there's this problem that most people know that they don't have a personal stake in whether their beliefs are correct, right? In the sense that nothing bad happens to them if they are mistaken about politics. Bad things do happen to you if you're mistaken about things in your personal life. So, like, if I don't know where the supermarket is, I could wind up going to the wrong place when I'm trying to get food, so I suffer the cost. But if I'm wrong about the benefits of immigration, I do not suffer the cost of that false belief, because there is almost zero probability that I'm going to actually change government policy about immigration. Okay, so then people don't try very hard to get the correct political beliefs. And so, okay, so then it's sort of like they know that they can afford to indulge their emotions. So there's a particular belief that makes you feel good, then you could adopt that belief without bothering to look at the evidence. So like, and yeah, I think that's very common.
As a philosopher, do you find often that philosophy is a compelling reason to change your mind and then act out in the world in that way? Because it seems that this is a large philosophical analysis on progressivism.
Yeah.
Do you find those reasons to usually be compelling for yourself?
Well, like there's not that much for me to do because I don't have any political power. If I did, then I guess I would change government policies. The only thing for me to do is talk. So I change my beliefs and then I express them. And so that's true, that happens.
What about in like a more general sense of philosophizing in general?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, does philosophy help me to live? I don't know. I try to be more rational. Let's see. So I became a vegetarian for philosophical reasons, you could say. I mean, it's like really straightforward philosophical reasons, but like, I think pain and suffering are bad. I think you shouldn't inflict enormous pain and suffering for trivial reasons. So I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that. Any other things? I'm not sure. Right, like there's a bunch of things that you could sort of describe as philosophical, but people wouldn't really think of it that way. Like, why do I not steal? Because stealing is wrong. So you could say that that's a philosophical belief of mine, right? But it's like such a common belief that it's like it's not that impressive.
Yeah.
I guess
No one's handing you some laurels for not stealing.
Yeah, or so like it's not that big of a selling point for philosophy, right? Because like everybody believes that stealing is wrong, or most people believe that.
Yeah. So what is the value of philosophy in this landscape that we're now in?
I mean, to me, the main thing is that it helps you to think more clearly. And so, like, I like to use this analogy that, you know how when you're asleep and you're dreaming, there's stuff that's happening that doesn't make any sense, and you don't notice that it doesn't make any sense? So you're in a confused state. And it's only when you wake up that you realize that that stuff made no sense. Okay. Well, that's kind of like how it is when you get philosophical training. Like, if you haven't studied philosophy, then you might have thoughts about philosophical questions, but they'll be totally confused, and you won't notice that they don't make any sense. And then after you've been studying philosophy for a few years, you'll notice that those things don't make any sense. So it's sort of like waking up. And, is that good? Well, I just sort of think like having a clearer state of mind is intrinsically better, like not being confused. Like philosophy will not necessarily tell you the answers. Like you will not necessarily figure out the answers to philosophical questions, but you will probably not be confused. Like you may just not know. Maybe you will not know whether you have free will or not, but you won't have like some confused, incoherent view about it.
Yeah, you'll understand what the possibilities are for actually having free will. What are the reasons for that? Not having free will. What are the reasons for that? What is free will? You'll be able to define everything quite well and clearly.
Yeah, well, you may not be able to define free will either.
Yeah,
because that's a controversy.
You can try. Yeah,
but
you'll know what the arguments are.
But you probably won't. You probably won't endorse an indefensible definition. That's the progress.
You'll have a somewhat reasonable view of free will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Because like there's this thing in epistemology where we tried to define knowledge, right? And like, okay, well, famously, like people define knowledge as justified true belief or something, and then like, okay, and Edmund Gettier showed that was not true. And then there's just like this huge explosion of people trying to find the correct definition, and they never agreed on the definition of knowledge. But we don't believe that false definition anymore. So that's the progress. We've rejected some false definitions.
I guess if someone to start in like philosophy, where should they start? Besides reading Knowledge, Reality, and Value, of course.
Yeah. Of course, obviously, read all of my books in my blog.
They're endorsed by Karl Marx. Right?
Yeah. Well, Karl Marx endorsed progressive myths because he said, if only I had listened to Mike Huemer, millions might not have had to die in the 20th century. Now, I can't prove that he said that. It wasn't in writing. I just heard him saying that in my mind, so I transcribed that. What I don't know. What are other good introductions to philosophy? Like Bertrand Russell's "The Problems of Philosophy" is really good. Sort of like sort of an introduction to what people were thinking about in the early 20th century. But they're fairly universal questions. What else? I don't know.
People usually say Plato's dialogues, but would you not?
Yeah, well, are they a good introduction? I mean, they're sort of like a good, easy introduction because it's like fun to read the dialogues between two people. Now, my problem is that I don't think that the arguments are any good. I think Plato or Socrates, under the control of Plato as the writer, is just like constantly not giving good arguments, or like people in the dialogues give good arguments. Sometimes Socrates just doesn't know the answer, but like sometimes he's giving arguments that are just bad. And so, but it is good to like get people to think about things. Like sometimes they do succeed in pointing out bad arguments. Like that could be useful.
And as a model, it's the Socratic method is probably a pretty good model for philosophy. Just talking with someone, maybe.
Well, yeah, like some things about this are good. So, like what happens in the dialogues is that somebody tries to Socrates, or at least especially
Plato disguised as Socrates.
Yeah, particularly later in the later dialogues, like Socrates is trying to put forward an argument, and he does it by asking questions and then getting these answers, and then like you can get his conclusion from these answers. But that does not work in real life, because in real life, you don't have control of the answers that other people give in the way that Plato has control of the answers that people give in the dialogue.
Oh, true.
So in real life, they almost never answer your question in the way you intended. And like, even though you think that there's one answer to this question that is obvious, the person somehow manages to not say it. Like if they don't want to directly contradict the obvious answer, they'll just like answer a different question, and then like you have to wrangle with them to get them.
For sure.
So anyway, so it usually doesn't work. Usually, if you have an argument, you should just state the argument.
Yeah. But I guess if you're unsure if you have an argument, I guess just the exploration of a philosophical topic between multiple people.
Yeah.
Do you think Socratic method is decent enough for that job, or?
Yeah. Well, a good thing is just like trying to reach a mutual understanding. Like, because the other thing that usually doesn't happen in real life is that you wind up with an agreement at the end. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Right? So.
And then that doesn't really happen very often in Plato's dialogues either, right? But.
Well, I think like later, right?
Oh,
I think in later dialogues, like so in the Republic, like they're like, yep. Okay, we found the best society.
We all agree.
It's the rule by philosopher kings. That's the best kind of society.
Yeah.
But okay, so in real life, you're probably not going to reach an agreement, but a realistic goal would be coming to understand each other's positions better and where you disagree. So just like, questioning the person on their views until you understand why they're disagreeing with you. Like usually you can find there's some like philosophical issue that you're seeing in different ways, and you can kind of see how they would see it that way, even though that's not the way you see it. And when you reach that point, it's like, okay, good.
We understand each other.
We accomplished what we could reasonably expect to accomplish.
Sure. Yeah, which is not agree, but have a clear understanding of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. There seems to be a thread with the progressive myths, or even in politics in general, where there's a lot of fear of tribalism and fear of saying the wrong thing or getting pushed out of the wrong group. And I think, the value of courage has just been dispelled a lot from young people in society in general. And so on this podcast, we always like to ask the guests to participate in a carrots and sticks challenge, which is a way of living courageously. It's usually a 1 to 2 week challenge where the guest challenges themselves in a way that they could live more courageously. And the stick is their self-chosen punishment if they fail to live more courageously. So I would pose you the question.
Wait, what's the question?
So the question is, well, first, do you want to participate?
Probably not.
That's fair.
Well, and like, what would I do to be more courageous? I mean, another way of putting that is, hey, Mike, take some more risks. Why should I do that? Like, what if it goes badly? And I'm already taking the risks that I think are warranted. Should I take more that I don't initially think are warranted? Probably not.
Well, what about one that you think is warranted? Are you taking all the risks you think are warranted?
I don't know. Like I'd have to think for a while, right?
Yeah.
But generally, yeah. But risky behavior is usually not that wise. I guess people would say that publishing this book was risky.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think it's that risky though. We're not living in the Middle Ages where like you would get executed if the church
very low
if the
punishment
church
for it.
disagrees with you. So, and if we were, then I wouldn't publish it. Or, maybe I would publish that, but I wouldn't publish criticisms of the church.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the proposal would be like a small thing like what you did there.
Yeah.
Just to, because I guess, I don't know, there's some value in you, because you talk about in the book about how so many academics are just like kind of cowardly and very agreeable and afraid maybe to rock the boat a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it would be cool if the philosopher professor Michael Huemer could demonstrate some more courage or encourage his professors in some way or something. I don't know.
I mean, I talk about, you shouldn't take unwarranted risks, but like other people disagreeing with you and like tweeting at you is not a danger. Okay, like I've said some things that are unpopular, like progressives would hate. But I don't really think of that as risky per se. Like, I bet there's a bunch of people on Twitter right now who hate me.
For most people, there would be a perceived fear there, even if it's in itself not risky. Yeah.
If they were actually going to physically attack me, then that would be dangerous. But if they're just going to tweet at me, and maybe I'll just block them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the mob has some. Well, it depends on how. Sometimes the mob is effective, and they get people dismissed right from their positions and whatever.
Yeah.
But
There's some canceling that.
And there's some
actually
possibility that
happens.
risk happening with the publishing of this book, right? But
Yeah.
But I guess you feel safe enough with tenure.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. So like tenure officially means that you couldn't be fired except for like a fairly small list of serious things. But it doesn't literally mean that you can't be fired for your political views. It just makes it hard. It just means that if I am fired for my political views, I'm going to have a great lawsuit.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I'll probably win a bunch of money from the university.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So either way, you win.
Well, I don't know. Like the money would probably not be worth it. Right? Because, like if you get fired for political reasons, it's like really hard to get hired anywhere.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
This has
It's
been
talking
great.
to you.
I know. And where can people find you if they're looking for you?
So I have a blog on Substack called Fake News, FAKENOUS. And, I have a bunch of books on Amazon. Buy my books.
Cool. Awesome.
All right. Great talking to you.
Yeah.